Today's the first English-speaking podcast of this channel, and I welcome Bill Chopik. Bill Chopik is a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan State in the USA, and he has a very interesting study on narcissism worldwide with 53 countries that he analyzed. And interestingly, Germany is the one with the most narcissists. So welcome, Bill, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Would you describe your field of expertise or field of research to my community?
Yeah, of course. So we mostly study how relationships and the people in them change over time and across situations, whether that be when you first start dating or if you've been together for 30 years or as you have children. But we just have a fascination for how context affects people, whether that's the person you love, kind of the conditions into which you were born, or even where you live.
Interesting. And so what brought you to the topic of narcissism? Of course, it's a big topic for relationships.
It is, yeah, because it's just so consequential and people have this lived experience, whether that be interacting with their coworkers or their bosses or, unfortunately, sometimes even their partners. And I think we looked at the modern literature and saw that a lot of it was very US or even Western European centric. So
Yeah.
we tried to look at some really basic questions about um, how different are older and younger people, how different are men and women, how does social class play into narcissism. But we tried to undo a lot of the limitations by taking this really broad perspective by trying to include, a bunch of different countries. And the field and subdiscipline of narcissism is just it's both new and old in a lot of ways. But in terms of it, the new part is kind of branching out to see how, say, the country in which you live might be different or might be shaping your psychological experience.
Yeah. And so you said, sounds like the motivation was really get a broader perspective on the whole narcissism field. And I know that my community is not so much in contact yet with the difference of the rivalry part and the admiration part. Could you explain this to people who haven't touched on this yet?
Yeah, I think it's good to think about it in terms of kind of wanting to be seen as positively viewed, sort of self-enhancement kind of. Think of like the big egos that you want to feel admired and respected and looked at and deference. So that's admiration, and there's definitely a part of narcissism within that, like wanting to constantly seek out that attention and that admiration. And then rivalry is another aspect, and that has to do with more with antagonism and a focus on short-term outcomes and competition between people. And a lot of times that's the thing that's causing problems is this
Yeah.
antagonism, this kind of conflict with other people. Wanting to constantly be worshipped and admired is also its own issue that has a bunch of other problems. Um, but yeah, so the evolution of how narcissism has been measured and studied has kind of been really dramatic. But now this kind of way of thinking about narcissism has kind of taken hold as a way of explaining like why narcissism is sometimes looks like it's good in some circumstances, but causes problems. So that's what we tried to adopt, was this admiration and rivalry parts of narcissism.
Yeah. So I mean, the original paper I think really states this as like the bright side of narcissism and kind of the dark side. Because I mean, being admired, I mean, I can raise my hand. I definitely like it. I mean, I have an audience of, I think in January or February, several million people saw my posts, and
And we all think you're wonderful, and we all think you're incredible.
yeah, I mean, at least I do. uh, and I see that. So I think this is the admiration part, and I think it's general. It helps to get good results, and the rivalry part is then trying to put other people down. So if I would put a metaphor to it, admiration are the people who try to build the highest buildings of the village, and rivalry is trying to take away parts of other buildings so that they have the highest ones.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And yeah, because the bright side, narcissism could drive us to do really incredible things. Like, yeah, like build the tallest building, but try for the promotion. Try to work hard, be, a valued member, respected member of communities. But yeah, there is this antagonism thing, and all those people have to live together. So the ones that really
Yeah.
want, the attention and the admiration, and those who see the world as this conflict jungle that they have to fight through.
And so looking at the data, I must say I was then like even more shocked that Germany, where I initially come from, is first or highest point on the narcissism scale. But then if we divide the other two, it's also first in rivalry.
Mm.
So I don't know if you've ever been to Germany, but what are now your like prejudices against Germany?
I'll air my grievances. Yeah, it's really, really hard to pinpoint why a country is the way that it is. Each one is just so different. Their history is different, how they kind of treat their own citizens, how they interact with their neighbors. Even the professional or economic circumstances within a country affect kind of the expression of narcissism. So I mean, one thing we found is that countries that are a little bit more well off economically tend to be a bit higher in all sorts of narcissism, both admiration and this rivalry component.
Yeah.
So, that might explain some of the reason why Germany's towards the top of the list compared to other, say, developing countries. But yeah, it's really, really tough. And then actually, I when you read a paper like this, you're just naturally curious, like, where does Germany fall? Where does the United States fall?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that's lost is that there's really narcissists everywhere, which is maybe a scary thought, but it's also a true thought. So we can focus on like why Germany is the first. And I've been to Germany, and I don't know. It's not immediately apparent to a visitor why they would be number one, but in general, there's this sense that the differences between countries aren't super dramatic. Like Germany might be a bit of an outlier. But yeah, even when you look at any particular country, so there's a lot of really, really humble people in Germany, people who don't like to kind of trumpet their own accomplishments, or those who actually play really well with others. So, sometimes we neglect the fact that there's so many people within a country that vary dramatically. But yeah, so economics play a bit of a factor, country's own unique history. And then also just there's so many different people within Germany, within the United States, within Switzerland, within Nairobi. So there's a lot of variability within all these cultures.
Yeah. And still, you mentioned the outlier. I used AI, but data analysis told me that I think Germany is even more than 10% higher than second place. So it must at one point be kind of an outlier, even though we don't. Probably you can understand, and also I don't yet why Germany is that high. It's at least what the data shows.
Yeah, it is a bit high, because some will be even like a few scale points less. And that's probably what the AI was kind of picking up on, is that when you look at some countries, it's very, very high. So yeah, I think the mean is in the 6, whereas a lot of countries fall like 4 or 3. So yeah, it is a bit of an outlier, but then there's a bunch of countries that it also kind of clusters with.
Yeah.
So it's not alone in its narcissism problems, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, those people are everywhere. It's just for me, when I started the whole journey to understanding narcissism deeper, of course, also looked at podcasts and things from the US, and it always sounds like, it's like the narcissism wave comes from the US over to Europe and will infect everyone. And now I see like, okay, Germany is now the up in the scale.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's it's a little bit of a simplification. Yes, definitely. The United States is known for a very narcissistic culture, but I think it's more accurate that narcissism is a thing that's probably always existed. If you read historical accounts of kings and
of course,
royalty, or colorful characters throughout history, and that's another kind of good thing about this study, is that it's not strictly an American thing, actually. So, odds are that it's originated in other countries and other cultures throughout centuries. It's just that we live in this hyper-connected world, so maybe it's easier to see it a lot.
Yeah, of course, And for me, it's always interesting to bridge between science and day-to-day life. And I know that the initial paper from Admiration and Rivalry did not come from you, but from your colleagues, also being actually most of them German.
That's right.
Could you shed some light how a normal person can distinguish maybe between a person who is more on the admiration scale and someone who's more on the rivalry scale.
Yeah, it can be very subtle too, and they are often correlated. So people who like to be admired also value this competitive um, part of kind of their relationships in society. So yeah, I think one thing, and this comes from the clinical psychology literature, is that oftentimes when you look at like personality disorders and things, it often boils down to if these things are interrupting or compromising something that's happening in their everyday life. So rivalry might be a good thing in some circumstances, like if you're, say, competitive with yourself, or like a friendly rivalry that makes everybody better or it makes everybody try a bit hard. But if it starts to, say, lead to fights at work, or you get fired or demoted, or it's really affecting your romantic relationship really, really poor, really dramatically, that's what I would look out for, is that if it's starting to affect kind of functioning in some way. But yeah, I think subtle forms of competition just for the sake of competition, if there's no kind of outcome or related thing. Although, you said it earlier, like everyone likes to be admired somewhat. So there's a sense in which, um, even at low levels, a lot of people have these things. People like to get a little competitive, a little, right? But not so much so that it
Yeah.
really damages their friendships. But the way they measure narcissism is really dramatic. So people who are high in rivalry will respond to a question like, I want my rivals to fail. What a dramatic scale item, right?
Yeah.
But these people will look at that and they'll be like, yeah, no, that makes sense for me. So you can see like people would endorse items like that. They might navigate their work and romantic relationships in particularly antagonistic ways.
Mm.
Um, they'll often do tit for tat kind of scorekeeping in relationships. As a coach, you can kind of see these patterns in couples
Yeah.
too. So those are the types of things in everyday life that if you see that it starts to kind of negatively affect a person's life, that's a sense in which, even though we all have narcissistic tendencies, that's when it might be blurring into, full blown narcissism.
Yeah. Okay. So then I see examples of like clients describing that, yeah, he was always nice to me, but if you see like signs of, yeah, I'm happy that now Miss Muller is failing her presentation. And I mean, I would never, even if I don't like her, I would never wish someone that a presentation fails. But if you hear these kind of things that, yeah, rivalries
Yeah.
wanting to fail, being willing to put others down to
Mhm.
get up, then this should be a quite clear red flag of narcissism behavior, even though they might not show it yet to their romantic partners, right?
Yeah, if they take delight in the downfall of others, that's usually bad, an
Yeah,
indicator that they kind of value these things. So, yeah, that it can be really subtle, and like I said, like it can be adaptive in some contexts, right? But the sense in which it's starting to kind of be a toxic element in people's relationships, and yeah, sabotaging rivals and kind of taking delight when they do poorly. And um,
yeah,
there's other things too, like they fight more, they fight unfairly, they argue, they want to be right all the time. So it does come out in a bunch of different ways in everyday life.
yeah. Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the admiration side might also have their downfalls because so far from our discussion, it sounded like, yeah, there's the bright side of narcissism. You get more done. You might become an influential
Mhm.
coach and have a lot of followers. But then, what's the difficulty there if you for the people listening for the romantic relationships, if there's someone with strong tendencies for admiration, maybe not that much on the rivalry scale.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, in general, it's often associated with a lot of positive outcomes like self-esteem, sometimes happiness, not always, but you can imagine like the hyper focus and hyper pursuit of status. You can imagine there's probably problems with that could emerge. They could also be hypersensitive to criticism. So if you want
Okay.
to be seen in a positive light, if a client had challenged your kind of professional credentials or your advice to them, there's a sense in which like, no, I want to be admired, and now you're challenging, you're trying to knock me off my pedestal. Um, and sometimes these things work in tandem. So, for example, there's some work by my German colleagues that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
where they'll find that people high in admiration, they usually do well in really early dating contexts because they're kind of positive and, we want to date people who are great because we're great ourselves, right? Um,
Yeah.
so there's a sense in which they really thrive in these short-term thin slices, brief meetings. Think of like 5-minute interviews or 5-minute kind of small talk sessions. But then a lot of times maybe the rivalry starts to creep in a little bit where, the first couple weeks of a new relationship are really great. But then slowly over time, it turns toxic when you realize that, oh, their pursuit of status is kind of overshadowing me or overshadowing the fact that I want to get to know them.
Yeah.
And getting to know people inherently involves vulnerability. And if people are constantly pursuing admiration, maybe they don't disclose the uncomfortable things that ultimately form bonds between people. So, yeah, there's a sense in
Yeah.
which like admiration might interfere with people's ability to kind of get close to other people. And that's tragic for different reasons, right?
Yeah. So then I don't know all the interconnections yet between admiration rivalry and the Big Five scale. But what I hear now that because in general I would always describe narcissists as like high in assertiveness and low in empathy or agree with overall. But this I always thought is actually spot on, especially for the rivalry part. But now what I hear from you that probably also the admiration part might be also that much self-centered, that there's not much empathy for the others, just for oneself, and which then is not really agreeableness.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Yeah,
Or
exactly. Yeah. I think that's good. Yeah. People who study the Big Five will often say it's maybe a blend of some extroversion facets, like assertiveness is one,
yeah,
um, and kind of high positive energy. And then, yeah, agreeableness as well. And that includes things like empathy or observing like courtesy or social norms and rules. Um, it's less related to other things too. There's some controversy over neuroticism, because some people used to look at narcissists as this like fragile ego or fragile self-esteem, like they need to be seen because
yeah,
it underlies this kind of insecurity. Um, and that's only partially true, it looks like, and that's why the admiration versus rivalry was helpful because um, it can distinguish between some healthy forms versus unhealthy forms. But
okay,
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, openness is less related. Conscientiousness is less related. So it's a lot of it is how you interact with other people and how you think about yourself. And those are
yeah,
things like extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
yeah, yeah. And I think I'm sure it was in your paper or from the paper of Buck, where they actually then said that I think high neuroticism is more linked to the rivalry because then it's like a self-defense thing that you need to protect yourself and destroy others, which is usually more on the neuroticism part.
Right. Yeah, and that's why they lash out is because of
Yeah,
this. Yeah, for years and years and years, there was they called it different names, and that's why the admiration rivalry was useful because there were so many different ways of measuring narcissism or thinking about it,
yeah,
and that kind of fragile, vulnerable part kept popping up. So they used to call it vulnerable narcissism, or they still sort of do, or
yeah,
hypersensitive narcissism. Um, so yeah, so a lot of that's bound up in rivalry, and that's one of a few different explanations for why narcissists are so difficult to deal with. Is because it comes from a place of anxiety, and they use competition as a way of um, securing themselves.
yeah. And since you mentioned already now the vulnerable part of narcissism, I think your study just mostly or purely, correct me, focuses on the grandiose narcissism part, correct?
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
how does this connect with the whole vulnerability, or in German we also say the hidden narcissist part? Because I also watched interesting interviews from Peterson on narcissism, and he said the problem was that the narcissists that we see in the cultures, like gangsters and politicians and all stuff, they're all these grandiose, but those people never show up in therapy. But then there's more vulnerable parts who actually tend to depression and
Yep. Yep.
emotional issues that they actually show up in therapy, but those are completely different people, and they therefore was a long time the challenge that science could only look at the therapy people, but the broad public could see those and could never bridge those two worlds. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, you captured it really well, because some people would complain about narcissists at work and their relationships. And then, the academic and, to some degree, therapeutic kind of corners couldn't give a lot of advice, because it's like, well, we don't really talk to them a lot. We don't know the intricacies of the
Yeah.
universe of a narcissist person. And yeah, you put it really well. But I have a colleague who characterizes it as, the thing about narcissists is that they don't think it's a problem, and that's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah.
There's fancy words I can use, egosyntonic. They don't actually realize that it's a maladaptive thing. So yeah, when you give them an item like, I want my rivals to fail, they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, why would you live life in any other way?
Yeah.
And that's a problem with a lot of things. So like, some insecurely attached people don't want to go to couples therapy, and that's a problem too. Like, they're not
Yeah.
willing to even engage in the process. Um, so yeah, that's part of the problem, is that even in our studies, or even like the people who might come to you as a coach, they're just psychologically different than those who choose not to, right?
Yeah.
But of course, like you said, they are in the world, and we do have to kind of interact with them. So that's why it's useful to study the broad population, not those people who have personality disorders. It is very important, obviously, but
Yeah.
in our approach, we try to look at really broad indicators, and then from that we can maybe give some advice for how to like navigate the relationships with narcissists.
Yeah. And so you said at one point, narcissists don't see this as a issue. And I think her name was Erica Carlson from Toronto.
Oh yeah, I know her. Yeah.
Who then also made the test that how well actually narcissists know that they're narcissistic, and from their meta perspective, that evaluating how other people see themselves, that they knew at first I come off sympathetic, charismatic, but then these starts to decline. But then basically, well, yeah, that's how it is. If the other people are like too weak to put others down, it's not my issue. I think it was this nice phrase from Noel Gallagher from Oasis: I don't want to be arrogant, but we're just the best band in the world. So it's like, that's the clear sticker for narcissism.
Yeah, no, very much so. And yeah, the Erica Carlson paper, really great researcher. And those papers are so fun, because it starts out with a really simple observation, like, do narcissists know that they're narcissistic? Which is just like, do they realize how annoying they are, how self-centered they are, how rivalrous they are? And the Erica Carlson paper is great, because the answer is, yeah, they do. They just don't care.
Yeah.
So, it's not like they're delusional. It's not like they're unaware that they can be domineering. It's just that, so actually it's those types of papers really changed our perspective on narcissism. And, to get to our point earlier about why they don't go to therapy, they're fully aware of their thoughts and biases and the filters in which they view the world, but they don't think it's a problem. They think everybody else is the problem. Again, partially because they think they're incredible. So they're not going to admit that. But yeah, those papers are really valuable, because they showed us that, no, narcissists are maybe motivated to think in certain ways, and it doesn't totally, color their world such that they're wildly inaccurate about how people think about them. So yeah, those are really fun studies. So, and but it makes it more insidious. Narcissists know that they're a problem, but they just
Don't
won't
care.
work on it. They won't work on it, and they won't treat you any differently.
Yeah. It's like in German, we have this joke that someone in the radio says, attention on this highway. There's, in German, they call Geisterfahrer, so like people driving in the wrong direction. So it's like, attention, there's one person driving in the wrong direction, and this is one? There are thousands.
Exactly. No, that's perfect. Yeah, it's like, why? I'm not the problem, obviously. I live in this world with losers and rivals, and they just need time to see how incredible I am. Yeah, that's what they're going for.
Yeah. And what I didn't tell you in my introduction, that I already specialized on this, actually interviewing narcissists. So I'd always some narcissists put in comments under my videos, and I started interviewing someone who was really like hugely interesting. So especially how open they were, and also one of them was like, yeah, I know that I come across like the charming person, so I try to have them like codependent as quick as possible.
Mm.
So that at one point when they see my true self, they're then like so much addicted and codependent to me that they don't want to lose it. They don't want to leave anymore.
Wow. Yeah,
And
the amount of self-insight in that statement is, yeah, like I'm sort of manipulating my relationships to have them accept my true nature.
yeah,
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 wow, that's fascinating.
yeah. And also, with one person, I did I always mix them up,
Yep,
NPI,
MPI. Yep, MPI. Yep.
Narcissistic Personality Inventory. For those listening that don't know, you will see either it's already aired or will air soon, the interview with the narcissist who did with me the test, and put some explanations on why it was like this and not, because he's actually one of the few people who is not narcissistic anymore, but he still sees his tendencies to do so.
Mm.
And he now managed to behave mostly differently. And he was a great insight, because I even showed him once interviews with my clients, and after three minutes he told me if and how he could manipulate this person.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So
Yeah, so
it's
okay, so it's always within him a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, one thing to maybe give people hope is that, for the most part, a lot of the more toxic elements of narcissism do decline over time and decrease, and part of that is because it's actually really difficult to live your whole life as a narcissist. We talked today about kind of how it affects relationships, your work, your
yeah,
dating. So that's one comforting thing that I take, is that eventually narcissists get their act together. There's some humility injected. Um, exactly sure why that happens is a bit debated right now. Do you keep getting feedback and it finally sticks that you're not incredible, or do you have a few failures, or do you just become a more mature person, do you realize it's screwing your life up? Um, so yeah, one thing is that narcissism does tend to improve and be mitigated over time. Um, but not everybody's. For some people, it's super, super stable. So
yeah,
that one interview that you did is probably going to be incredible, because that might be one of the few um, examples where they dramatically change from like being really, really high to kind of being able to identify some of these problematic tendencies.
yeah, yeah. And since we already touched on this, I think you mentioned a paper from Roberts and Nichols. Um, I sadly translate this into German, but it said a stronger emotional regulation and an increase in agreeableness and an increase in conscientiousness might be able to reduce narcissism.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's consistent with, again, these are all competing explanations. Like one is,
Yeah,
or I guess they could all be happening, right? Where you realize some of your mistakes, you're not perfect, and then also mature. So yeah, big debate in psychology is why people change. And for years and years and years, people thought it was because of like life events or shocks that happen to people. So you get married, you have kids, you get divorced, you get remarried, right?
yeah,
You retire. Um, and I think that work, it's been really underwhelming, and not super consistent. So narcissists don't change super dramatically in response to things. So you think that maybe getting married, it involves like sacrifice and putting other people before you, having a child, right? Like here's this child you have to keep alive and feed and be attentive to. And actually that doesn't make people less narcissistic actually. So,
yeah,
um, but what does, it looks like, is the increase in these other things, like the Roberts and Nichols illustration of, well, you become nicer and more responsible. And maybe by virtue of those things, you realize you should calm down a little bit and be humble and maybe don't take up as much space. And
yeah,
so that's kind of the most um, promising working theory, is the Roberts and Nichols idea, because like, I wish there was some transformative experience the narcissist could experience, but it looks like that's not the case. So let's not wait for some
no,
massive religious conversion moment for narcissists. It's because it's probably not going to happen. And even if it did happen, it might not be changing them very much.
yeah, yeah. And this is a very important message for all the people listening who have one narcissist at their side. Said, yeah, but he could be such a good man or such a good woman if only. And even the narcissist I had on the show said, like, baby, don't bet on it. If you want to better bet on that it's not getting better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there's a lot of self-insight. So I think that's one surprise that, no, narcissists know who they are. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of research is also on the attachment theory, and attachment is also one thing that is strongly contextual from my experience. And I heard that, probably you can better tell me, also this develops with age, putting people more on the secure attachment side. So could this also be something that maybe plays also a role, that narcissism could decrease? It's also part of your study in general, that this
Yeah.
might be a
So
connection.
yeah, I think there is a connection. It's so interesting. Yeah, I think there are a lot of connections, but then there just hasn't been a lot of studies on it. But when you look at why people become more secure, it would reason that would affect narcissism as well. So we talked earlier about this, people high in rivalry, they kind of have this vulnerability, where it underlying this is some neuroticism and maybe some insecurities about their standing in the world. So some of the main hypotheses about why people become more secure have to do with targeting those insecurities. So um,
Hmm.
if you're really, really anxiously attached, you're worried about how available your partner is going to be and if they'll kind of be around, if they'll be there when you need them. And a lot of those are kind of insecurities. And maybe it involves a little bit of your views about yourself, if you're worthy of love,
Hmm.
um, if your actions are going to be reciprocated or not. Um, so actually, if you targeted a bunch of attachment insecurities, it's possible that narcissism might improve as well. Um, or likewise, just being exposed to positive relationship circumstances or being supported, a lot of that will soften people, sort of their sharp edges. Um, so yeah, as people move towards security, um, there's a sense in which if you kind of target this underlying thing that's, driving all of it, odds are they'll become nicer too. They'll get better at regulating their emotions. They'll get less stressed out.
Hmm.
Um, but also like narcissism, attachment to is just often a very difficult thing to change because it's just so um, crucial to people's identity. It's rooted in their childhood experiences, and you're undoing a lot of things when you're trying to kind of get people's relationships to improve. I'm sure you've seen like in your coaching experience, some tendencies that insecurely attached people do, and it's really hard to do because a lot of those things are automatic. But
Yeah.
I think if the constellation of these characteristics or traits change, odds are the more harmful parts of narcissism would also go away. But having said that, people haven't really done a lot of those. Like, give someone an attachment intervention and see if they become less narcissistic. That's an amazing idea, and no one's ever done it.
Yeah. And and we come back to the same issue, why it's not happened that much, because those people are not really open for those interventions.
That's right. No, the people who need it the most aren't accessible, so
Yeah.
they're not willing to buy into it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a funny phrase that we use in German. It's like, people go to therapy because of people who actually should have gone to therapy.
There's also this other phrase I've heard is, yeah, I've started going to therapy. I'm still a jerk, but I use the word boundaries a lot more. And it's a way of like
Yeah.
using therapy as, you clearly didn't learn the lesson, which is hopefully that you do some self-examination and
Yeah.
kind of undo things. And yeah, so it's so interesting. It's just, you don't want to be prescriptive and force people into therapy, but there are ways in which they could clearly benefit from it. And it's sometimes just tough to get out of that. I mean, there's actually research on therapy and if it can change people's personalities. And it looks like kind of becomes more, people become a little bit more pro-social,
Mm.
a little bit more, a lot of times you target neuroticism in therapy, but
Yeah.
they become more emotionally stable and stuff too. So it's possible. It's just the battle of getting people there and engaging with it.
Yeah. Even though I don't want to go too deep in the personality thing, but
Mhm.
from what I always, if someone asks me how personality is, I would say it's like a fixed version of who you are, but you can still develop patterns if you follow these. Because I have clients who, if they would self-assess, they would give them an anxiety level of of 80 or something, but the test actually showed 25 or 30.
Mm.
And then looking into their past, they realize, oh, actually, I haven't been this anxious as a young kid, but then over life events, I became anxious, but it's not really my personality. It's the patterns that I developed.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
big part we do on the coaching is actually focusing on building new patterns, developing self-worth, working on their, something we use is schema therapy, working on the schemas using NLP and hypnosis. And with this, we then get changes in patterns, even though I believe that personality would mostly stay the same. But going back to...
go ahead. Yeah, I mean, there's a perspective of personality that it's all those things too. Like, well, why would you rely on this pattern? Why would you go to this pattern to resolve this kind of issue? So yeah, I think you put it well in the sense that it's a really stable thing, but then also it changes or it's made manifest in different situations at different times in life.
Yeah.
But even the consistency with those things are what you think about or what you do or how you feel. So a lot of times people will point to that as personality too. And another truth is that among the people who do change, they don't change super dramatically. So, you gave this experience of someone when they were a kid versus, 25 years later, an 80 versus 25 score.
Yeah.
The goal with a lot of our studies is to assess that person a bunch of times to see, hey, what is their underlying personality? And the hope is if they live for 80 years, we have a good sense of who they were in those 80 years. But what were you going to say?
So we talked about the topic of attachment theory and we talked about narcissism. And since you investigate both, did you ever do research on combining those two fields?
No, not yet, although we do have some data that look at both. I mean, in some sense, one of the challenges with a study like that is that you're not sure which came first, the attachment insecurity or if they had some enduring kind of narcissistic tendencies. And it seems almost like we would have a good grasp of which of those comes first, but actually it's harder than you think. Or there's been twin studies to show that at least part of attachment and part of narcissism might be at least a little bit heritable. Like, if your parents were narcissistic or insecurely attached, there's this transmission that happens. So there haven't been a lot of studies. There have been a few. But again, if you wanted to get to how would we improve people's lives, how would we improve their relationships? In some contexts, it would make sense to target narcissism. In other contexts, it would make sense to target insecure attachment. And there just aren't a ton of people that kind of do both. So we've been trying, we've been starting to collect both as a way of getting closer to it, but it's all still very, very new.
Okay. Because my assumption, if I could give a hypothesis, would be that narcissists are more on the avoidant scale of attachment.
Yeah, and that kind of drills into how they view themselves and other people too. And so there's theories about that in attachment. Like, do you view yourself as worthy of love? Do you view other people as worthy of love? And then there's kind of combinations of those. You can love yourself but not others, or you can love other people but hate yourself. So like that's probably the most promising place to target the overlap is how do you view yourself? How do you view other people? And then, you'll see things like avoidance being correlated with kind of some aspects of narcissism. But again, we're not sure. And over time, maybe narcissists become more avoidantly attached, or maybe avoidantly attached people, develop narcissism, like they try dating and they realize that I'm incredible. Everyone else is the problem. And then you see how that could kind of creep into narcissism, right? So, and that's part of the fun with studying these things is trying to figure out why people are the way they are, hopefully in a non-judgmental, open way, to study it. And, but no, I think your hypothesis is right on. It's just, why would they be related is the mystery right now.
Yeah, that was a very interesting question. And what I hear from my clients, so then, I mean, of course, more or less suffer from those experiences. What I also see, I don't know, miss the English term, in Germany what's called like the disorganized, who have avoidant and insecure tendencies, because those narcissists are quite controlling, which I would see as in more like insecure. They try to hold as strong as possible, and but still then if needed, or when things get emotional, then still push away. So it's like a lot of push and pull, and which could then also be like a mixture of being insecure and avoidantly attached.
Yeah, and I mean, those cases are usually really, really kind of difficult to deal with, and I mean, luckily, it's not the most common combination, but yeah, so you imagine you have all these anxious people who desperately, desperately want relationships and want meaning and want a good partner, but nevertheless, they can't manage to get close to other people. They can't trust people. Um, so yeah, that combination can be really, really difficult. Like, luckily, most people are pretty secure, just on average, if you look at the whole population. But
Mhm.
then, yeah, there's a sense in which some people are more anxious than others, some people are more avoidant than others, and then some people are more narcissistic than others.
Yeah,
So yeah, and again, like, part of it is trying to figure out if we were to target or give someone advice in like a coaching context or a therapeutic context, what are some tools we can give them to maybe reduce some of those anxious feelings or to let their guard down to kind of engage with it, or for narcissists maybe to be a little bit vulnerable and not a defensive way.
yeah,
Um, and I talk a big game, but because those things are very, very difficult to do, we've been struggling to teach people how to do that for as long as these constructs have been around
no,
in a scientific context.
no. I mean, the teaching part is my daily business, but then but then probably the numbers I could give to your statistics are not as in the areas where they wouldn't be statistically relevant. But it would definitely be something to discuss, because we developed quite some interventions ourselves. Um, but the question that came up within me and also in the preparation, maybe you can shed some light on it. I would say I know the answer, but I would like to hear it from your point. The colleague Mitya Bak actually wrote a book that was for the broader public. I don't know if you know this. And I read quite some Amazon reviews, and there were a lot of one-star reviews. So a lot of people like being pissed that he would basically have this bright side of narcissism and the dark side, and because of the even mentioning that there might be a bright side, that all those who are probably real victims from rivalry narcissists, they really can't understand that there could even be a bright side. What would you say to those people who are trying to fight against science?
Now, I mean, the first is that I understand it. That it's yeah, Dr. Bach, who I collaborate with and like a lot. Um, it is really difficult to hear that, or to. I don't think he did this, but I imagine it could potentially come off as someone minimizing it by acknowledging that this thing that so negatively affected your life might have had benefits for that person. That's a really uncomfortable kind of truth to come to terms with. Um, but I think there's a way of talking about narcissism, a way that does it justice, where you can acknowledge the real harms that narcissists do to people. And, I think as psychologists, and partially why he probably wrote the book, is to figure out why people are the way they are.
Yeah,
And part of that is that we're often motivated by rewards, and sometimes narcissism is rewarded. Sometimes it does help you get ahead. Um, does it compromise other things in your life? Does it compromise relationships or maybe your own integrity? Probably. But I think with any sort of thing, there is a spectrum within the general population where there are some good things. There's even good things for things that sound bad. So something like neuroticism. I think most people would say they don't want to be anxious. However, does it make sense to be anxious about some things in your life?
for
I would
sure. Yeah,
think so. Yeah, totally. Like it keeps us alive. It keeps us
yeah,
from massively screwing it up. The fact that you're so nervous about your presentation makes you work harder.
yeah.
And, yeah, so I can appreciate, especially victims of narcissistic relationships, maybe reading that book, or maybe they reviewed it without reading it, just just the mere suggestion that narcissism could be good in some circumstances, it can be a bit triggering. Um, but that's kind of the complexity of the human experience, is that you'll have people high and low in all sorts of psychological traits. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. On average, it looks like narcissism is pretty bad. But the book is useful because it tries to dive into, well, how's it expressed? Why would this be so stable? Why don't people go to therapy? or go
Yeah.
to relationship coaching. So I think those books are really valuable. And but you have to be really careful because you don't want to come off as minimizing people's struggles. And knowing him, he's really, really careful in how he talks about it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it is really difficult to hear a message like that. So yeah, just know that scientists will absorb people's stories about their relationship experiences, and they'll take them seriously. They know that narcissism can be really damaging. Um, but there's also this desire to seek out why things are the way that they are. And I think that involves acknowledging some uncomfortable truths, not excusing it, but at least, trying to figure out why people are the way they are without being super judgmental about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and that's I think the biggest lesson that I also try to teach my client on the whole personality thing. There's no good or bad.
Right.
It's like sometimes it helps if you're like a 2 meter person. You could be the perfect basketball player or volleyball or
Right.
something. But if you sit in a too tight airplane and you have your knees next to your ears, it's quite annoying to be that high. That high.
Yeah. And
And
that's why society works, right? Is that we have a combination of all these people: humble people, narcissistic
yeah,
people, anxious people, calm people, extroverts, shy people. Um, so yeah, the basketball player is a good example of there's trade-offs to pretty
to
much
everything. Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the same is with narcissism. Narcissism seems for the general public and people also watching this video, for them it's like a huge negative thing, but for the people actually living with it, they don't see the reason to change because for them they see the benefits that being like, I think it's not only the rise of the narcissist, also the rise of the people pleaser.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the more people pleaser there are, the easier it gets for the narcissist. So basically,
Yeah.
if there would be, maybe even if there would be less people pleasers, narcissists would have a more
Yeah.
difficult stand, and maybe
Right.
they would even maybe behave differently. So maybe we could
Yeah.
educate narcissists by just our pure better setting boundaries.
Yeah, this is a great reframing of this. And yeah, so I think when victims of narcissistic relationships read a book like that, um, I hope that they at least partially take it that it's actually not about them all the time,
Yeah,
or sometimes it might be a little bit. So again, I was trying to figure out why narcissists are the way they are. It's not that, why figure out why the reason they hurt you was beneficial. That wasn't a goal of the book. It's the goal of the
yeah,
book is to kind of characterize why they are the way they are. And yeah, I loved your free framing of, yeah, you have these pushes and pulls of people with different traits, and you might be able to do away with narcissists if you radically transform how people respond to narcissists.
yeah,
Um, but that's probably impossible, let alone getting them to go to therapy.
yeah,
Transforming a whole society to tame back the narcissist, that's a much bigger challenge.
yeah. And so to finish off I asked myself a practical question that how would you answer it. So let's assume maybe you don't like a younger sister or a daughter that would be going to the dating field, and with all the knowledge you have on narcissism and also attachment theory, what kind of guidelines or hints would you give such person that is dear to your heart, but you know how easy she could be hurt? What
Yeah.
would you give them for the way of romantic relationships?
Yeah, it's really dangerous with narcissism because we just talked about how like they could be really charming and positive, and then the bad side creeps out eventually. But
Yeah,
it's really funny. There's this metaphor. It's called the chocolate cake theory of narcissism. Oh, it seems so delectable and incredible right when you start, but then you later you ate too much chocolate, you ate too much sugar, you get sick to your stomach.
yeah,
That's what dating a narcissist is kind of like. Um, yeah. So, but in terms of having a close loved one start dating, um, to put my relationship researcher hat on, I think there's this hyper focus on trying to find a perfect person, and that's when narcissists can kind of maybe take advantage of people. And I think that there's this um, huge desire to find someone who's really similar to you. And I think that we'll often have our criteria for what we think is the best partner, mate, called like desired mate characteristics. Who do you want to date? And the truth is, a lot of that research has been pretty underwhelming as well. So there's some evidence that we don't maybe always have insight into what we want. The narcissism literature would suggest maybe we shouldn't trust the people who come off as perfect, or at least tell us that they're perfect.
Yeah.
So I think the best thing that advice I would give, and this replicates at least and has some foundational stuff that I can point to and I'm really, really confident about, is find someone who is really responsive to your needs,
Mhm.
and listens to you. Um, so having a partner that you think is responsive is one of the biggest predictors of you continuing a relationship with them. Um, and actually, by using that as a cardinal rule or virtue, you'll probably avoid the narcissists, because the responsiveness involves suspending their ego, looking out for you, not viewing you as a competitor, rather as a partner. Um, and that also makes a bunch of other things better too. So maybe it'll make you a little bit more secure if you feel like you're someone in your life is you can be relied on, someone that can be relied on. So
Yeah.
I know that's a flippant and simple answer, but actually, if as a guiding principle, it can help you avoid a lot of problems if you kind of seek out someone that makes you feel heard and you think that they'll be there for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't focus so much on hair color or how much hair you have. I'm bald for the listeners. Um, and if you focus more on that psychological feeling, odds are it'll bode well.
Yeah. Thanks. So if I may chip in what I usually tell them, it's like I always say, it's not that I want to tell you try to slow your heart down, but
Mm,
try to keep your head in the game.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
in Germany, it's if you start a new job after we have 6 months of, I don't know if you call it probation,
Yeah.
where you really try things out, and after 6 months you have a talk. Okay, do you really want to put this into permanent
Mhm.
job relationship or
Yeah.
not? And I try to always give them like, view this as a job. View this as a would would you, if even if it's a great job, would you directly buy a super sports car or the least? Would you move to a different city to get a super expensive flight, or would you
Mhm.
wait until it's really settled? And to keep this in mind, view we're trying it in the first 6 months. Everybody shows their best. From after time, people actually start to show their true personality,
Yeah.
and to keep move things slow, keep the head in the game, and then actually look for especially those things. Am I heard? Is there interested? Am I supported?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's in a way dating, especially early on, and similar to starting a new job. A lot of it's about like gathering evidence and data. If
yeah,
this is good for me, and yeah, I love the idea of the long term perspective because it prevents us from making really rash decisions too. And I mean, we've all been in love and head over heels, and that can really warp our perception and make us do
yeah,
foolish things. But um, yeah, I think yeah, the long term perspective and asking yourself those questions is super valuable because I think a lot of people get caught up in the first 6 months of a job or they get hyper focused on stuff and they don't always take take a moment to kind of reflect on these things if it's serving their needs, if the job is serving their professional development well.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that's wise perspective. And then the hope is that you're prioritizing stuff in jobs or love that would lean to something that's sustainable long term if you wanted that. So yeah, I mean, in a way, being more calm headed about relationships and jobs for that matter could be really valuable. And then actually it could reveal some of the more damaging narcissistic tendencies that maybe you brush over or you kind of excuse or don't, you're not always attentive to. But if you took that moment to reflect on it, maybe that provides an opportunity to get out of a bad situation.
yeah, yeah. To just be like bruised, not really shot.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. And so this was the question for the people starting to dating. What would you advise people who realized after this discussion that they might have narcissistic partners or close ones, and what would you
Mm.
propose there?
Yeah, that's tough. It's yeah, we definitely know when people are narcissistic, and then of course narcissists know that they're narcissists. So yeah, oftentimes it's not a mystery. So it's not like you wake up one day and you realize it all the time. The signs were there, maybe. It can be really difficult. And, the truth is that because all of us probably have a little bit of narcissism within us, like, you said earlier, and I'll admit it too, that I like it when people say nice things about me. Um, I sometimes like competition, not actually, I rarely like competition, but,
Well, I do.
sometimes I do. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
great. Um, so I think it's worth evaluating or acknowledging that we have a little bit of these tendencies within us. And then, um, if you came to that realization, ask, is it really damaging the relationship? Is it something that could be altered, say by going to, say, therapy or coaching, or relying on other sources of support? So yeah, so if you do wake up in a problematic situation, um, it's worth evaluating if it's A, damaging, and B, if they're willing to change, if they're willing to work on it. Because there's a sense in which, again, the vast majority of the population don't have personality disorders, but they do have some biases, they do have some blind spots. And luckily, there's some evidence that we could maybe cover up some of those, uh, or remove blind spots, or get people to act more deliberatively. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for like easily divorcing people or packing all your things and moving out that day while they're at work.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, if it is a really toxic situation, you should try to get out of the relationship as best you can. Um, but also, there's a sense in which there's also this acknowledgement that people aren't perfect, that they'll have their psychological tendencies. Maybe they'll even have some insecure attachment. And, that could be an opportunity to work on something like that. And the good thing is that your partner will be happier, you'll be happier, your relationship will be happier. Um, but part of it is recognizing these things and being willing to work on them to get them to change.
Yeah. And then seeing if they're actually willing to.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if they're willing to participate, be an
Yeah.
active participants, and the hope is that they are.
Yeah. Great. Will, this was some really nice insights. And
Yeah.
if you're open to it, I didn't read all the attachment papers you brought out, but I think there's some golden nuggets that might also support my coaching. Maybe if you're willing for another
Yeah.
round, I would be happy
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, totally talk about if you want to talk all attachment next time, I'm happy to do so, because we spend most of our time thinking about attachment actually, but we have a lot of narcissism papers at this point, but
Yeah.
we usually think of everything through like an attachment lens. So we could talk
Okay.
for 3 hours about that if you ever want to.
Perfect. So, but then I want to finish with one question because the
Yeah.
original book by Amy Levine and Rachel Heller claimed, and I don't know if this is still state of the art, like say like quarter are insecure, quarter are secure, quarter are avoidant, and quarter are the mixture in between. Is this still the case? Because from what I see, and I think I heard you mention that there are quite some secure folks. What is your current scientific state on that?
Yeah, I don't think that distribution's really great way to think about it. I think in those early days, what they did is they took a sample and they kind of just divided it in 4 ways and then looked at how each of those 4 quadrants would be related to like an outcome, like if you stay with your partner or if you're dissatisfied in your relationship. Um, but yeah, there was a shift in the late 90s, 2000s where they kind of moved a little bit away from doing those quadrants, and they more just started measuring attachment like continuously. Like
Mhm.
I might be more anxiously attached than you. It's not that you're just not anxiously attached. It's just that I'm a little bit more. And
Yeah.
I think that was a little bit better, and it kind of characterized people more accurately, because then, like, especially from a coaching or therapeutic context, like it might shift your mindset if someone comes to you and say, I'm preoccupied, attached, but it might be more simple, like, oh, I just really struggle with anxiety in these situations and avoidance in these situations. And then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's more actionable. We can kind of target,
Yeah.
what you're thinking about in that. So yeah, the phrase that was tossed around a lot at the time was, people differ by degree, not by type.
Mhm.
And I think that's also like a more holistic perspective on how people vary from each other. And then all of a sudden it just reframes interventions in a way is like, can we make people a little less anxious? And for a lot of people, that would dramatically improve their lives.
Definitely. Yeah.
But hopping over from one quadrant to another. So like the general population doesn't fit neatly into those quadrants, and it's
Yeah.
not evenly divided, like you said earlier. Um, so yeah, I mean, most people are probably low on at least one of the attachment dimensions, but
Mhm.
they might be high enough where it's starting to screw up their life a bit, and then that's when the hope is that they go and get help, or at least think critically about it. So yeah, so this state of the art has shifted a little bit, um, and then it's also shifting again. So
Yeah.
we'll kind of see what's on the horizon in terms of how people's relationship behavior is expressed.
Yeah. Interesting. So
Yeah,
one thing from the just things we discussed, and also take into account the narc concept
yeah,
from Bach, because a lot of people that actually come to me are actually both, and they never realize that they have the avoidant tendencies also within them.
mm,
And
yeah,
so one thing that just pop up, that there might be also a two factor scale, like in the narc.
mhm,
Like, for example, there's 1 to 100 in avoidant, 1 to 100 in um, anxious. And
mhm,
then there might be people like on the 70-30. There might be people like being 80-60. And so maybe this
mhm,
could be similar. It's just,
yeah.
I try to think about this, if this fits the interventions we can do within our coaching.
Mhm. Yeah, there's going to be different combinations. So yeah, someone
Yeah.
will be at the 30th percentile of this, but 80th of that, and yeah, and then that partially guides what you work on, right? So is it
Yeah.
you need to work? So some people, I'm sure you can appreciate, will go to a relationship coach or a therapist, um, and it might be like a personal problem less than a relationship problem, right? Like
Yeah.
this thing that's causing damage. If you kind of work, if your partner just worked on that, that'll actually solve the reason you both came in today. Um, and I think that's why it's super useful to look at all these things in tandem, is
Yeah.
because what's causing the narcissistic defensive tendencies does it stem from like insecurity, or was it a byproduct of your relationship experiences? And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really really valuable in kind of sussing out why people are the way they are. And part of that is looking at it kind of like continuously, like, are you in the 80th percentile or the 30th?
Yeah.
Or even if you're in the mid range, but it's still causing a lot of problems, we could probably still work with you on that and get you better.
Yeah.
So yeah, attachment has been a really useful taxonomy for understanding why people struggle the way they do.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot for your insights. Was
Yeah,
really inspiring also for my for my scientific intellect.
good. Yeah, good to hear it. No, it's really wonderful chatting with you.
Perfect. Then are there some last words you want to give to the German community about the
Oh,
things we adjust today?
yeah, no, I think kind of pursuing relationships that are authentic and reflecting at it. I thought the 6 month metaphor was really great, kind of reflecting and taking the long term perspective and valuing kind of the things that might lead to a positive relationship. Yeah, one final thing I'll leave the listeners with is that they're in recent years they've been doing these really large comprehensive studies where they'll try to find out like what's contributing most to your happiness and what's contributing most to your relationship success. And one thing that's been shocking, and it's kind of controversial in the field, is that um, a lot of it might not have to do with your partner. There's certain situations which obviously your partner defines how happy you are. But I think one insight from that research is that a lot of it has to do with you as a person. So one reason why you're dissatisfied in your relationship might come down to something about you.
Mm,
Um, of course, again, like partners are really important, but um, in terms of sussing out like what would we intervene on, or kind of what advice would we give people for dating, and the truth is like a lot of happiness comes from within, and also a lot of relationship success also comes from within too. So um I think it's also worth reflecting on your own accountability in relationships too, kind of not constantly blaming your partner, maybe looking for ways that you could act better.
yeah.
um so that was one kind of big thing happening in our corner of the field, was a return to what are individuals doing in relationships. So that's one really exciting thing that I'll leave the audience with, that if you were to work on improving yourself, odds are a lot of other things would kind of fall into place too.
Yeah. It's some nice final words. And actually, interesting is also our findings within our coaching. We have people where sometimes the partner didn't even know that his wife was in the coaching. And after 4 or 5 weeks, the relationship shifted. So
Interesting. And despite one person not even being part of it, right?
yeah. And one person even actually saying, I don't want you to go to therapy or coaching or whatsoever. And
nevertheless, it got better, right? Yeah. Love it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Bill. Maybe until another time. Thank you for time. And to the rest, danke fürs Zuhören oder Zuschauen.